Right, hello and welcome to the latest Catholic Concern for Animals vlog on our YouTube channel. And today we are delighted to welcome the Right Reverend Bishop John Arnold, the Bishop of Salford, who is here to talk about a new initiative in Salford called the Guardians of Creation, in which he's the lead actor. So welcome, Bishop John.
Good morning. Very pleased to speak to you.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. And as usual, I'm also joined by the Chief Executive, Chris Fegan. Welcome, Chris.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Gerald. Morning, Bishop John.
Bishop John, the Guardians of Creation, I've actually been looking on the internet for this, and a number of different things come up. It started actually with the Guardians of God's Creation from the Bishops' Conference, and now it's become this Salford Diocese-led research partnership with different organisations like St Mary's University. So how did that all arise? How did that come about?
Well, I think it was partly because I was named as spokesman for the Bishops' Conference, and I really felt that I couldn't just be talking about the environment. I had to try and do something and be, in a way, however clumsily, a lead. And fortunately, where I live, there's quite a large estate, I think you'd call it, where we have a lot of woodland and an area which we can use for learning about the environment, particularly for children in schools, but also for members of parishes who want to come along and learn about horticulture and healthy growing of things. And so that was also a very good possibility. And then we thought that really we needed to think carefully about decarbonisation and how we might do it. And we thought that it would be a good thing to study within one diocese and to concentrate our efforts there, which is the diocese where I'm bishop, so that we could have information which could be reliably then farmed around all the dioceses and to all institutions who want to hear about it, about ways in which we can move towards a neutral carbon output. And so it's all rather got centred on Salford, but I'm delighted because that's local to me. And St Mary's University and the Laudato Si Research Institute in Oxford have been extremely generous, as indeed the Tyndale Centre in the University of Manchester is now getting on board. So we've got lots of expertise around. And one of the great things I find whenever I'm talking about the environment with any other groups is there's a real desire to network and mutually encourage one another. I was on a webinar last week with the environmental diocesan leads, the people in each diocese who have been named really as environmental leads. And it was the happiest, most cooperative meeting I've been to in months. It was, everybody was enthusing, wanting to share information and making sure that we weren't sort of unnecessarily duplicating work. People were taking different responsibilities. It was really very encouraging. So that's what I find with the environment at the moment is a great deal of mutual encouragement. And I'm very grateful for that.
You mentioned, you know, the centering it on Salford, which is your diocese, and I thought that was particularly interesting. That is particularly interesting because of Salford's history as an industrial area, and of course its symbolic history in terms of, you know, Engels and the Engels family and conditions of the working class. And it seems kind of appropriate that Salford should be leading this in terms of undoing, if you like, or redressing some of the problems of industrialisation and the issues that has created.
I think that's very true. Manchester really claims, and with some pride, to have been the start of the Industrial Revolution, and in many ways that has borne great benefit for people over 200 years. What we haven't looked at is the damage that we've been doing, and it's only really in the last 30 or 40 years that we've begun to measure the damage. But you're quite right, if this great process, which has been of great benefit, the Industrial Revolution, started here. So the remedy to the damage does well to start here too, and to recognize what we've done. And there are ways in which we can benefit people without damaging the environment. But we've got to learn those ways, and we've got to learn them quickly now, because we've lost quite a lot of time in learning about what is wrong, what's going wrong, and the damage we're doing. So we've now got to be quite urgent but optimistic about mending the damage and making our world a better place, caring for our common home, as Pope Francis says.
I have to say that living in South Wales with the Taff outside my window and the Rhondda on the other side, I might contest that origins of Industrial Revolution aspect with you, but we'll leave that for another day. The thing which struck me about the Guardians of Creation, the idea of this research partnership, is it's really based in practical aspects. It's really about what the diocese can do to actually make its work better and more, and really more sustainable, not just use that as a kind of tick box word on a form.
Yes, I think, yeah, it's not just the diocese, but seeing the diocese, or each diocese, as a local church where people are committed and they belong to a community, because Pope Francis says each and every one of us has to be responsible for doing our bit in living more sensibly, and creating a better environment, mending the damage. So for a diocese, you see, we've got our parishes, parish communities, we've got our schools, and here in Salford, we've got 208 Catholic schools. That's a lot of pupils. And we've also got a number of Catholic organizations. Now, if we can be educating all the people in those institutions, in the schools, in parishes, and encouraging people to learn about individual practice, then I think we're doing the best we can to make sure that everybody's part of healing the damage. Certainly, I've been quite amazed by some of the schools I visited before lockdown, where there was a real interest, particularly in the primary schools. I did write a letter, a pastoral letter to the diocese, and I wrote 2 other editions of it, one to secondary schools and one to primary schools, just based in more accessible language, I suppose, for them. The reaction in the schools was really quite extraordinary. I remember visiting one primary school and being taken by the hand by some 7-year-old who led me very forcibly to a built-up garden where he explained what was being planted where and where the water flow was best. And it was a bit of a lecture, actually. And I said to the head teacher, look, I've been here all this morning and the whole school seemed to be out in the school grounds. Is this damaging your curriculum? And he said, no, actually, the children are so excited about the environment. They're learning about it by reading about it, writing about it, and counting it. Our literacy levels are actually improving, and the children were really enjoying it. So I think we've got a great space there with the schools for them to be leading. And we know so much of the young people's enthusiasm for the environment and their determination that things need to change. So schools is a great place to be. The parishes, yes, increasingly, they seem to be taking responsibility for themselves, but also individual parishioners leading in different projects, and we're learning together. And with this decarbonisation project, I hope that we can really be a much healthier church, and other people too. We've got this project here at Wardley Hall, where I live, the Laudato Si Centre, and it's open to everybody, all faiths and none. And that was a little bit of the reason for changing the title from Guardians of God's Creation to Guardians of Creation, because I don't want anybody to feel excluded if they think we're just running a religious project here. We're not. It's based on our faith as Catholics, but it is open to everybody, because all our brothers and sisters need to be caring for the environment.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very significant point. Of course, it's something which informs us at Catholic Concern for Animals as well, about being inclusive and not excluding anybody from being involved in the work that we do. What you're saying about schools actually reminded me of a documentary I saw a little while ago about a school running in the Second World War. And there are obviously few teachers there and many more pupils, and one teacher had charge of 3 classes. And one of the classes, their lesson was actually tending the school grounds. And they were out, weeding and doing the flower borders and looking after school grounds. And another set of pupils were sent off to collect milk from a local farmer. And that kind of like connection with the world around us in terms of the rurality, the aspects of the school and so on, is something which we kind of lost after the Second World War. I mean, during my generation, Chris's generation, and it's good to see it coming back in schools, I think.
Yes, one hears all too many stories of children being taken on school trips to see the seaside for the first time, or to visit a farm, or to see cattle grazing in fields, or whatever it is. And you think, well, have we really lost that connection? That they really need to know much more about the world in which we live, and the local world in which we live, which has farms and animals and biodiversity. And, for all too many school children, I think in recent years, they've grown up going from their houses or their apartments to school and back home. And it's rather lost its connection with nature. And that's good to see the children, but really enthusiastic about getting outside and finding out what plants are all about and what bees can do. And, Bugs hotels, I've noticed there have been quite a few of those springing up around the place, and children fascinated by the sheer variety of wildlife and insects that they're freely around us, but we've not been noticing them. Yeah,
indeed, absolutely. I'd like to pick up on another point that you raised as well about the urgency of doing this, because again, I mean, one of the things which strikes me is that these problems, the problems in particular of climate change, but also of other aspects, are not new. We've known about them for many decades now. I mean, I remember kind of going back to the 80s and 90s, talking about these kind of issues, and certainly issues of pollution and the way in which we abuse our natural world has been there for a long, long time. You can go back to people like Rachel Carson and beyond in terms of discussions of environmental issues. Why is it we haven't listened to this before? Why is it we now have to do things urgently instead of having done them in good time earlier? And can we turn it about now?
I think probably we've been rather complacent. People have said the environment needs looking after, and yes, we've got to change things. But I think it's in recent years where we've heard much more the sense of measurement. That people have said, 4 trillion tons of ice have come away from Greenland, and what is it? A football field of Louisiana is lost every minute or something to rising waters. And you hear about the wildfires and the droughts and the cyclones, and people are saying this is because of climate change. We're much more knowledgeable in terms of statistics, and that I think has brought it home to a lot of people. We've had 1 or 2 rather spectacular speakers on behalf of climate change, and the young people have listened a lot to Greta, and she's had her real impact. David Attenborough has done a great deal, and there are others making programs about nature and the environment that I think are making an increasing impact. But there is an urgency, because we can now see that if we really are going to have 1.5 degree increase, that's going to cost us. And that's more or less within the measured time of the decade, and we've got to turn things around. And I think also Pope Francis has been so articulate in connecting things together. So, we know that climate change is going to very badly damage the tracts of Africa where food will no longer be able to be grown. So literally millions of people will have to move in order to survive. That means a migration beyond anything that we've had before, which is going to have its impact on human trafficking and modern slavery and all. And I think the urgency is now beginning to make an impact on a lot more people who are understanding these things. And when we know that 2030 is such an important date, and people can see that that's just at the end of this decade, it's no time at all, that we've got to be making the changes. And that's why I think COP26 is going to be so important this year. Are people that determined, and will their political leaders understand the sense of urgency that people have for this change? And I hope it's not going to be an urgency built on fear and panic, because I think it must be an urgency built on optimism and hope. And that's something that Pope Francis never lose sight of. There's always hope, but we've got to be realistic in how we're going to harness that hope and be optimistic for our future and the future generations.
I really like the connections you're making, because one of the quotes that you made in announcing this was from Pope Francis, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And you've made those links there. I mean, how important do you think it is to make the links between global poverty, national poverty, inequality, and the environment?
Well, I think it does all connect very closely together. We've really made a mess of things, haven't we, in this endless pursuit of building the market, building the economy, maximizing profits. We keep talking about growth of economies, and they can't go on growing forever if they're destroying resources. But we're not good at spreading the wealth that we have. And, you get statistics like, what is it? The 10 richest people in the world have the equivalent wealth of 3 billion other people in the world. That's crazy. I forget these statistics now, but there are far too many people who are struggling to survive when there are other people in prosperous nations like our own, where we have more, much more than we actually need. Even if we're living very comfortably, we just don't need all that we have. I might include myself in that. I'm utterly secure for what I can buy and what I need. And I feel that I've got to be reviewing for myself how distribution needs to be much better managed. Pope Francis speaks in Fratelli Tutti about a universal basic income, and that for many people is out of the question at the moment, but it's an idea that I think is well worth exploring. Maybe he looks at it in too simplistic a term at the moment, but with adaptation, with refinement, maybe there is something very positive in suggesting that people should have that security of the basic income. With that gives security to families, security to children, and it's so important. And when they first mentioned sort of a minimum wage, people laughed and said, "Well, that's never going to take off, can it?" But there it is, so I think we've got to be looking at adapting our economy, because at the moment things are not working. If the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, that's not the sort of world I want to live in.
So turn again to purely environmental issues. I mean, one of the things that we've been involved in CCA, as you know, is the fish project, which we've been doing with Eurogroup. And one of the aspects of that we haven't looked at strongly yet is about rivers and freshwater fish. And of course, again, Salford, Manchester is a place where you had a very polluted river at one time, and indeed lots of rivers around the country were extremely polluted, and you know, they have improved. They're not as good as they could be, but they have improved from where they are. And you know, that's something which we now need to make a kind of global issue, isn't it, in terms of the way in which industrializations in places in Africa and Asia, South America, are actually destroying resources, natural resources like fresh water.
Yes, we've got to clean things up, haven't we?
Yes.
We've simply just been dumping stuff, and that of course brings us to plastics, doesn't it? And the appalling way that we just throw plastic away. I've been, this is a bit of off on a tangent, but I went to Sierra Leone with CAFOD, and the airport at Freetown is a ferry ride away from the city, and we got into the ferry to cross to the city, and the ferry had to stop twice because it was stuck in an island of plastic that they feared was going to choke the propellers. So we just sat there whilst this mass of plastic moved past, and just appalling. So water is so important to us, isn't it? Whether it's the fresh water or seawater. And you hear appalling statistics about the tiny percentage of the world's oceans that are now actually rewilding in their own way, and the rest of the oceans are badly polluted. And you know, there are islands of plastic appearing in some places in the South Atlantic. But yes, there are rivers, and we've got the technology. That's the thing. We can keep clean water clean, and we can allow the creatures of the sea and the rivers to flourish. I was listening the other day to some trawlers that scrape along the floor of the sea as it scallops, collecting scallops, but the damage they're doing to the floor of the sea is horrendous. And will take time to repair for any number of other species that rely on the seafloor not being churned up by trawlers. So we've got to, again, it's Pope Francis connecting things, isn't it? We can't sort of isolate fishing from care for animals on the land. We can't isolate wild animals in their habitat from the domestic animals in our farms. We've got to have that global view of respecting life. I'm not going to say that people must give up eating meat. No, that wouldn't be within my scope at all. But that we treat every animal with respect is very important, and something that I think we've forgotten about for far too long.
Yeah, indeed. Chris, as from a CCA perspective, would you have any comments on what we've talked about so far?
Well, yeah, I'm absolutely delighted with what Bishop John has been saying, and I'm actually, and he knows what I'm about to say now. I think I've mentioned it before. I'm delighted this is taking place in the Salford diocese, because that's my hometown. Manchester is my home city, and I went to school in the Salford diocese, and indeed, and I think he also knows this, I actually worked for many years on the banks of the Irwell, and I watched it. And this was in the 1970s and early 80s. I watched it change colour on a daily basis because of the pollutants that were put in it, and now that river has wildlife on it. It has fish in the river. It has cormorants on the river. and of course the river is the border between the two great cities of Salford and Manchester. So I'm delighted that the Guardians of Creation project is taking place in Salford, and I'm hopeful that one of the focuses will be on the great rivers of Manchester, which were, as has been said, were tremendously polluted in the time of the Industrial Revolution. And it's only in the last 30-40 years that those rivers have been cleaned up. And there are other rivers in the UK. The Thames has been cleaned up, but Thames still has nowhere near the number and species of fish it used to have, even though it's in a lot better state than it was. So there's still work to be done. So I'm delighted with what Bishop John is saying, and the whole thing about the interconnectedness is absolutely crucial. That we live on a planet that is so interconnected, and we have done so much damage, and we need to repair that damage, and to think about, as Pope Francis has said, care for all creation. And so I'm delighted with what Bishop John has been saying, and the way the discussion has been going. And of course, quite rightly, we have COP26 being held in the UK later this year, and that will be a very, very significant event. And I'm delighted, and I've said this before, that the Americans are back in and will be involved. There was some great concern that the Americans would not be involved, but clearly that seems to have been changed, and I'm delighted about that. So that is hopefully a turning point when we get to Glasgow, and the work's being done before then. Because as has been said during the conversation, we've known about these things for quite a long time, and there's been quite a number of conventions and summits for some decades now, and we really need to stop talking and do action. So that's why I'm absolutely delighted that the Guardians of Creation project action is taking place, and Bishop John is leading that from Salford.
Talking of that, what I wanted to ask you, Bishop John, was it very early days in the research, obviously, and I appreciate that. And so this is a slightly unfair question, but when do you expect to see results from these research, and what are the kind of actual results that will arise from it? Is it going to be a set of practical guidelines? Is it going to be a kind of a discussion of the issues? What do you expect to arise at the end of this?
Right. Well, we're getting into quite sort of almost an academic area here, so I've got to be a bit careful, because what I say, we've got a study which we think will take about 2 years. It should come up with clear practical advice about decarbonisation and what every diocese can do concerning its buildings and its fuel, and how we can improve on that. Everything in the study will be open to anybody else who wants to use it. So I hope it will go further than the diocese. It's also aiming to produce practical advice for individuals and organizations. So we're all taking part. There's nothing, there's not going to be an academic report which will be put on a shelf somewhere. This is something that actually I think will cause practical changes in the way that we are living, in not just within the church, but this is open to people of all faiths and none. And I think we will be much more aware of, I suppose, more or less the daily routine. It will impact on that too. I should also mention the religious orders, because they've been really quite vocal in their interest in doing things practically. And I think that they'll also be leading by example. But, you know, we've got this project at Wardley Hall. Before the lockdown, lots of school children were coming, but lots of individuals who were interested in knowing what was going on. And I'm hoping that as is allowed, as we emerge from lockdown, we're going to have some serious education going on by people coming to our walled garden, to our outside classroom, learning about plastics and biodiversity and the bugs hotel and the bees, and actually going back home, knowing what they can do in their school playgrounds, what they can do in their gardens, and how their daily routines actually can make a serious impact on the environment for its well-being. So it's this is not to be an academic study that's just going to give us a lot more statistics. It's going to be what we can be doing and how we can be doing it safely together. I'm not sure I can.
Sorry, I apologise for cutting across you.
No.
I was just going to say that I think it's worth kind of emphasising that the initiative of Guardians of Creation, like Laudato Si itself, whilst based in the Catholic Church, is actually aimed at all of us. It's aimed at everyone. It will create ideas, practical ideas which people can take beyond the Catholic Church and in their own lives, which I think is tremendously positive. It's the Catholic Church leading the way for the whole of our society, and given that, what are the prospects, do you think, of other dioceses in the UK and indeed globally picking up on these issues and actually beginning to implement them?
Oh, I'm pretty optimistic about it. We did ask for every diocese to have an environmental lead, so that stuff wasn't just landing on the desk of the bishop because he's already got a fairly full in tray, and he might be panicking because he's not got the time for that. So an environmental lead, and so far I think we've got 15 out of the 23 dioceses have got environmental leads, and that's going up gradually. So I think the impact there is increasing in its potential all the time. But I noticed that there have been some bishops' conferences around the world that have spoken out very strongly about the environment, and that Laudato Si is proved to be, I believe, it's the most published papal document ever. And it's gone well beyond the church, and it's spoken to politicians and industrialists and NGOs and charities and development groups, and Pope Francis really is a very humble man, but he should be very proud of the impact that he has had. And the follow-up with Fratelli Tutti is also spoken about the environment as we grapple with the environment, how we can employ a sort of global politics, which will enhance our efforts, because we can't work in isolation. The care for our common home is the duty of everybody, and what we do here has an impact, as we have seen, on nations elsewhere, right around the world. And the awful truth is that we have had the impact of the environment in a much less detrimental way than the poorest nations who've done so little to deserve it. They've lived with nature in a much more effective way than we have since we began our industrialization. And yet we're destroying the environment that they've been peacefully working in without damage for generations. And so we've got to make that connection with everybody again, and we've got a lot to learn from indigenous peoples who really, if you go to India or to South America, the understanding of nature and the fine balance that has to be maintained, they have such a rich understanding. And we've got to get back to that, because at the moment we're just grabbing resources and using them. They're going to run out, and we're just going to find ourselves destroying the planet on which we live, which is an appalling prospect. But again, don't want panic. I want a sense of peaceful and optimistic urgency. And that's what we've got to be creating, particularly over these next few months leading up to COP, so that those people who go to COP understand that there is a real popular will for this change, and we're prepared to be working for it and working with it so that we can begin to repair the damage.
If I can come in quickly there, Gerald, just to totally agree with that. And by coincidence, I was on a call arranged by the Vatican yesterday on biodiversity at a diocese biodiversity roundtable, and we had contributions from Indigenous representatives on that call. And what Bishop Johnny said is absolutely right. We alluded to this earlier in the conversation, that we've lost the connection with land. We've lost the connection with nature. And examples were given earlier on about children seeing the sea for the first time, or seeing even an animal, a farm animal for the first time, apart from where they see them in their supermarkets in plastic containers, which we've already discussed. And this brings me back to the Manchester Salford situation. When I was growing up in Manchester, in South Manchester at my childhood, where I was born and where I grew up, there was a farm about 50 to 100 yards away. That farm was soon sold and built on for houses and land, houses and shops rather, and leisure centres. Now, I'm not decrying the decisions that was taken there. And obviously Manchester not only expanded in the time of the religion, it's been expanding ever since, and the city has grown, and cities have grown throughout the world. I mean, Manchester was the world's first industrial city, but it's tiny compared to some other cities on the planet, in Asia and Latin America. You know, even London is tiny compared to some of our global mega cities. And I think there is a definite thing here about our movement away from the land into the cities, and therefore our disconnect with the natural world. And this is somebody who is a city boy, born and bred, and very proud of it. But you know, there is definitely that disconnection, I think, as humans, when we started making these mega cities. And of course, there were cities in previous times. You know, we know that there were big cities, the South American, the Aztec times, and other places. But the mega industrial cities that we have now, there are people, as Bishop John said, who have never had any connection with nature because they live in what was once termed the concrete jungle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up on the South Devon coast, and I really feel a disconnect from, you know, the production of food myself. You know, so that was very different from Manchester. But I think for our generation, it was true almost wherever you were, unless you actually lived on a farm, you didn't get that kind of connection. And I think that it's something which I think is important to bring back. One last question, Bishop John. The initiative of Guardians of Creation is aimed at a single diocese. There's for many decades been the discussion in environmentalists about acting local, thinking global. Is there a connect there? And how is that connection going to be made between the local aspects in Salford and the global problems that we are facing?
Right. Let's start stage by stage, really. The first stage is that I'm spokesman for the environment to the Bishops' Conference and for the Bishops' Conference. So part of my brief is to be making the bishops more aware as best I can of what we need to be doing. And certainly the environment is something that does come up on the agenda more and more frequently with the Bishops' Conference, and I'm promoting it as best I can. The project in Salford is specifically there for their benefit. So we've got to remember, though, that theologically, a diocese is pretty independent. So we can't force its persuasion. But I think great progress is being made, and that there is a growing understanding, particularly with these diocesan environmental leads. It shows that individual bishops and dioceses are understanding much more the need for coordinated action. We've got the Pope so outspoken as the lead, and whenever I'm lost in a conversation, I can go straight back to Pope Francis and say, here is a man who is leading us in our faith and saying that the environment is part of our faith. And that, I think, is uniting dioceses around the world. And some dioceses and bishops' conferences are feeling the effects of climate change much more than we are. And some of them have written very powerfully. In South America, in the Philippines, really strong voices, full of wise, determined argument about what needs to be done. So we've got to keep stimulating that, but we've got to do it in a way that doesn't intimidate people. And there have been, I think, various courses of action which sometimes have turned people off from the idea of, if this is what environment is all about, we're not interested. It's too aggressive. I think we've got to be persuading people and encouraging people and not threatening in what we say about the environment, but helping people to understand so that everybody can be involved and recognize that there's good to be done, even in the details of our daily lives.
That's terrific. Thank you very much for that, Bishop John. I think there are a number of things that I would take forward from what you said. I mean, the idea of urgency and hope, I think, is very clear, and that kind of idea of us needing to persuade people, and I think people are open to persuasion far more now than they were in the past, and I think that's very true. Chris, any concluding comments on the conversation?
No, other than to say I'm really delighted about the contribution from Bishop John today. I'm delighted about the project in Salford and Manchester. I'm going to watch that with great interest, and hopefully CCA can play some part in that project in one way or another to support what is happening up there. I said particularly maybe around the wildlife issues and the river and the other wild spaces. So no, I'm just, and again, I just take, as you have, Gerald, from Bishop John, the two key things of hope and urgency. And if we put those two together, hopefully we'll make progress.
Bishop John, is there anything that you want to comment about which we haven't covered, or which you'd like to add anything to?
I'm just from a faith perspective, I think it's very important for me to believe that we're not alone in this, that there is a very important aspect of our faith, of prayer, and the effectiveness of prayer. We've got a little diocesan prayer. It's a very simple one, but it's one with which people have engaged very confidently. It's simply, "Stay with us, Lord, on our journey." And I think it does say a great deal. God's got his plan. He wants to be with us. We want to walk with him. And if he's staying with us, we're going in the right direction at pretty much the right speed. And for me, the environment has to be something that is an expression of my faith and my belief that we can, with God's help, achieve a great deal and all that's required of us.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, Bishop John, and thank you for your time today. It's I think one of the interviews I've most enjoyed. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I think this project is a very interesting one. I hope we can have you back to discuss wider issues and indeed the progress of Guardians of Creation as the project unfolds. But in the meantime, once again, thank you from CCA for your time and for being involved in our YouTube channel. And that concludes our vlog for today, and we hope you have enjoyed this and will enjoy future vlogs on YouTube. Thank you.